Okay, bonjour et bienvenue. Welcome to the koha-US Systems Administration and Report System Special Interest Group. Ta-da, I said the thing. Yeah, as per usual, we have no agenda, just a general, hey, let's talk about things in administration, system preferences, SQL questions. Anybody have anything they're dying to talk about? Chanel does. Go for it.
So I come to you all asking for your wise insights on this, as because I am in the process of setting up Koha. We're going live in mid-June.
Mhm.
Notices. We have 56 circulating libraries. And the way things stand, it looks like I have to create 56 instances for every type of notice. But I'm wondering if there's clever things I can do. Like, for example, can I set a notice that is for all libraries and then set a second notice that is for one library that does something a little different and just create it for them? And it will
Yeah,
override it will? Oh, thank
yeah.
goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, that's gonna make your life a lot easier.
Yes.
Notices
Yes.
follow the same like blanket logic as circ rules of if there's something library specific, it'll use that. But in the absence of something library specific, it falls back to things defined for all libraries.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a caveat there. So
Good.
the default, I think it's the default overdue notices are called, I don't remember what they're called in Koha. I think they were ODU 1, ODU 2, ODU 3.
Yeah.
So if you use those same codes, so if you have just a generic ODU 1 and you set that as your first overdue notice, and then you have one library that wants something completely off the wall different, you use that same ODU 1 code, but then you make it for that specific library. And so the way it works is if Koha goes through and if it finds that this notice being sent from this library, the code for that is ODU 1. If for whatever reason it can't send ODU 1 from a specific library, then it will fall back to ODU 1 for all libraries. And so
Oh,
that happens not just if there isn't a specific rule for that library, but like if there's a problem and for whatever reason it skips that ODU 1 for the specific library, it'll always fall back onto the one that says all libraries for that notice, for that
thank
Here,
notice code.
goodness. Thank
I can
goodness.
I can share my screen and show you
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
triggers and here we go. Okay, so this is the page where you define which overdue notices get used.
Mm-hmm.
So our first overdue notice, first off, this is defined for all libraries. We don't have anything defined for
Yeah.
sub-libraries, I think. Let me make sure that's true. Yeah, like this would be the Carnegie Stouts, our weird one. So if anybody had something special, it'd be them.
Do
So
you know
like
how
there's nothing,
lucky you are?
yeah, we're small. We're small and not that weird. Um, so like there's nothing defined here for Asbury, but that just means that they follow the default rules. And so this is saying find the notice that's called overdue notice with the code ODue,
Okay.
which if I go to notices and slips, ODue. So again, this is the ODue for all libraries. If I created a second notice, which I could even do like by copying this one, if I created a new notice with that same code that was specifically for the Asbury library, then when an Asbury checkout got that overdue notice, they would get the Asbury specific ODue instead of the library or the general all libraries ODue.
Okay. So I have a question here on your triggers page. I
Yeah,
see mostly you have email, print, and SMS chosen. Does that mean that you send all three, or was there some sort of logic there?
it would send all three if we hadn't done things in our notices to make it not do that. The Koha default is to send all of them for ODUs. And we cheated on that.
Okay.
with some template toolkit in the notices to say, this print notice, if the patron doesn't have an SMS number and they don't have an email address, then the print notice has content. Otherwise, it doesn't have content, and so it doesn't generate.
Yeah,
Okay.
Koha won't send a notice that has no content.
So you just put it won't let me save an empty field, so I can just put a space in and that would be considered empty.
I think a space would send a notice that is a space.
Oh
Yeah.
dear.
You just
So
need to
I've
leave
got to
it.
put, no, I can't leave it. If I leave it blank, it tells me I can't save it. Can't save a blank. So do I need to put in logic that'll always
Yeah.
fail?
Yeah, I mean, you could even say if 1 equals 0.
Right.
And yeah, so then in the SMS, we say, if they don't have an email address, but they do have an SMS number, do this. So it creates a like failover chain that Koha doesn't do on its own.
Okay. Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, I
To-
can, if I share my screen, I can show you what it looks like when you do have some extras.
Yeah. To add a weird wrinkle to this, there is some variability in when I say an Asbury checkout gets this type of overdue notice, you define whether an Asbury checkout is a checkout that happened at Asbury or a checkout to an Asbury patron. I think you might
Or-
also have the option of checkout of an Asbury item.
Yeah,
It's that like weirdness of which library counts, who owns this transaction.
Right.
yeah, and that's based on your definition and your circulation rules and in the system preferences of which rules circulation follows, whether it follows the item's home library or the library you're standing in when the thing gets checked out, or the library where the patron belongs to. And my recommendation for the sake of patrons, my recommendation is the rules should follow the library the patron is standing in.
That's what ours are.
Because I have worked at libraries where the rules follow the rules at the item's home library. And that can be really confusing because, when I've been in situations where the one item, the patron checks out 5 items that came from 5 different libraries. In one library, they check out for 3 weeks. One library, they check out for 2 weeks. One library, they check out for 4 weeks. One library, they check out for 30 days. And one library would check out for 31 days. And so the patron could conceivably walk out of the library with 5 books, all with different due dates. And that's the libraries in that situation like that, because that's the way they like to do things, is the rules follow the owning library, but the patrons hate it because they've got 5 different due dates. And I heard Renee say that's welcome to Ocean State Libraries, and that's welcome to many libraries in Idaho too. So, and whenever we would talk, at the library I was at, whenever we would talk about changing those rules, everybody would say, sure, we should make the rules the same at all the libraries, and so long as the rules we follow are the ones that my library uses, that's fine. And so there was never, in 10 years, there was never any movement on that topic. So, but this is what it looks like for us when I've got, this is the ODU 1, the default for all libraries, but then Basser, Lansing, Leavenworth, Linwood, and Rossville all have something different to find. So if the item's checked out at Rossville, it should follow this notice is the one that should be sent. But if for whatever reason it can't find a specific rule, then it falls back on this one. And it also, we have everything set up so that we have our notice and our triggers. We have some libraries, most libraries, they send the first notice at 7 days, and the second at 35, and the third at 45. But I think some of them, like Hiawatha, the second goes at 15 and the third goes at 30. So you can use those to define different days, different times for and that's a lot easier than defining different notices.
We've got so much more flexibility in the notices themselves these days with template toolkit. You probably, like, if you wanted to get real weird about it, you could probably just make one notice and make it highly variable
with
within it.
logic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard
hard,
somebody talking about doing that just to make it so that they only had one notice to manage.
Yeah, I can see pluses and minuses there.
Yeah.
the hard thing with Template Toolkit is because there's so little documentation that I'm pretty much flying blind, and it's also very strange to me that I see stuff that says we're supposed to be using Template Toolkit, but yet what they gave me out of the box as defaults doesn't use Template Toolkit. So
And I know there's a bug working to change that, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, actually in the next version in 2305, all of the default notices will be in Template
okay,
Toolkit.
Oh, that'll be really nice.
And there is on the wiki, I'm going to try and find the right wiki page.
I know there's a wiki page that shows what the default is for all the, it has the code for all the defaults. I found
Yeah.
that.
But there are also, it's notices and slips library, and I'll post that in the chat.
Yeah, I found that too. There's just not very much there.
Yeah, there's not very many there because I haven't posted some there because I'm in the middle of rewriting all of our notices to move them to Template Toolkit and to redo the CSS on all of our notices. But that's one of the issues. I reorganized this page recently on the wiki, and all of the notices that are there are all circulation notices. Nobody's ever posted any custom acquisitions or cataloging notices or suggestion notices or anything else. So if anybody here has good notices, feel free to post them. That's kind of my plug for the wiki lately, is post your custom notices.
Notices get hard for me because I end up, you know how like if you write a report that's really, really local, you think like there's no reason for me to share this. Like anybody else would have to spend 2 hours translating it. Notices hit that a similar spot for me, but I should push against that because there is value in just seeing what other people have done.
Yes, it would be, I mean, for me, it would be tremendously helpful to see the extent of what I could do. Like if someone has really
Sure.
made nice looking notices, that would be a great starting point for me, because, I'm just looking at this and I have no clue what I can do or really how to do it. So just feeling my way around in the dark.
I almost feel like if I take all the CSS out of my notices and post them, that might be a better way to go, because then people don't have to deal with my crazy CSS stuff.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like there would be value in seeing just like your bare bones logic absent any formatting of this is how you get the values.
Yeah, and the CSS should go in the CSS custom CSS library, because there is a custom CSS library too that doesn't have a lot of stuff in it.
But then on the other hand, like if your notice doesn't really work without the CSS, is it
Yeah.
bad to store them separately?
Well, and this is all about to change too with the addition of the using templates to build reports, because that's a new thing. And it's, if you're a Bywater customer, you already have that, but it's going to be a new thing in version 2305 for the whole Koha community. And Jason is going to do a presentation on the crazy stuff that he's done, and it's incredible to see the work that he's already done on this feature that isn't even in community Koha yet. So I've been working on it a little bit too, and we did a video recently about using the templates with reports, and it's really awesome to be able to do it. It's an incredibly useful thing to be able to do in Koha, but it's also gonna takes a lot of skills that a lot of people aren't going to have easy.
Yeah,
so it'd be nice to get a library for that stuff too.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have all the time to, I don't know, go back to school for web design, learn all that jQuery stuff. I don't know. If you don't know what George is talking about with notices as templates, last week's Monday Minutes was about it, or maybe this week's. So you could go back and find that video. Or if you dig back in the koha-US recordings to last month's systems administration SIG, Jason briefly showed off his cool overdue report that lets him run a report that gives printable versions of all his overdue notices to just like click the print button. It's super cool.
Yeah, I could even show you what I've been working on right now.
I really want to be able to do that because we have schools that want to print on demand notices.
We're doing that right now with Pages, but the template makes it cooler. Like my koha-US presentation about using Pages to do this is gonna look sad next to Jason's about templates. Oh well.
So you know, I've always hated this the print summary in the patron record, because it prints a summary that's it just assumes that you have a full page to print on. Let me pull this up without the print box. So when you try to print this on all you have is a receipt sized printer attached to your computer, it's unreadable and unusable. And that's because it prints out like this, and it's assuming that table wants to be on a full sheet of paper. And so what I did is, let me actually pull the borrower number out of here. I created a report that I've been working on over the last couple of days that can take the borrower number, and it gets all of the same data out of the patron record that's in that summary page, and it lays it out like this. But then when I put the template on it, and it'll take a second, then I can get it all stacked in as a list instead of, so it's all the same data that's in that summary. It's just that it's not in a table, it's in a list that would easily fit onto a receipt sized piece of paper. And I'm still working on it, but you know, that's the way that the template works is I mean, it's just using template toolkit, and it's, instead of looking for pieces of patron record, it's getting the data from the report, and it's saying, take this piece of the report and use template toolkit to stick it here, and take this other piece and stick it there. And so it's a really useful thing to be able to do to a report.
Yeah, just like a tiny on-the-fly mail merge.
Yeah, and well, Christopher said, you know, he has had an ODBC connection. He's been using Access, to use Microsoft Access to put the SQL into an output that Access can turn into a sheet of paper. And this will eliminate the need to buy Access, which is like a $500 product. And worse yet, owned by Microsoft.
Yeah, and is just Access. At the end of the day, you're touching it and it's gross. So cool. Chanel, do you have other notices questions?
I actually do. Let me share one. They just slowly pop into my head.
Yeah, seems right.
Let me share my screen. Okay, so my question is about the hold digest notice, which I've modified this some and removed some things, but it has this, you know, title, author, copy, location, where it's presumably printing out all the holds that have become available today. But there's no loop logic there. What's telling it to loop?
Those dumb little dashes.
Yeah, those 4 dashes above and below each line are the old koha syntax.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
those are the loop logic.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I thought maybe that was the case, that I didn't delete them, and now I'm glad that I didn't.
We ran into an issue with those on our SMS hold digest notice. We wanted to just send everything as a digest, but we don't actually put title information in the text message because it gets too long.
Mhm.
And it was we took those dashes out entirely, and so it repeated the, hey, your stuff is gonna, your hold is ready. It repeated that line once for every title you had available.
Mhm.
So now ours is the like one line of text we want, and then the dashes and the dashes again to say,
Yeah.
and then loop this nothing repeated times.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
We have the exact same hold notification for our borrowers.
Yeah. And I think I have seen a bug also to make those little dashes go away.
Yeah, it's I don't remember the bug number, but there is an omnibus bug for eliminating template toolkit. And don't worry about, right now isn't the time to go, oh my God, I've got to, change all my stuff over to template toolkit. There's going to be like a period of probably a year or two to get those moved over. And they're trying to come up with some way to help people go through that process.
Yeah, just documentation would go a long way.
Yeah.
That's there's also been a lot of discussion of documentation, because that's the biggest issue has of notices in general, not just template toolkit, but notices in general are vastly undocumented in Koha. And I am happy to say that Christopher and I did a presentation about notices and documentation, the documentation problem and the template toolkit issues at the last koha-US conference. And I don't know why, but people seem to have listened to us. And there's been a lot of movement in the last year. So I don't know why people listen to Christopher and I, but apparently they did.
The need for documentation needed to be reiterated exactly 173 times, and you hit it.
Something like that. Yeah, it was a lot.
Does anybody else want to dive in with questions before I toss the mic back to Chanel?
I think I've run out of things.
I don't know, like you're 2 months from migration. I'm sure you have all of the questions if we give you enough time.
I have a quick question regarding the holds queue. So something was new here. Let me share. Let's see. Okay, can you guys see the admin?
Yes.
Okay, so there's the local holds priority, which is here. Like, don't give priority, and then where was the other one? Oh, and then the holds queue prioritize branch. This is saying prioritize filling a hold by matching the patron's home library with an item having a matching holding library, but that seems to conflict with the local holds priority. And I wanted to know if one of them supersedes the other, or if I'm not reading it correctly.
This is one that makes me make terrible faces every time I think about it. They're questions about different parts of the hold. Holds queue prioritize branch changes which item gets targeted to fill the hold, whereas local holds priority changes the order in which patrons are given items. Local holds priority says, if I've got somebody in my list who wants to pick this book up here where the book is, jump them up in line and give them the book now, instead of transferring the book somewhere else before my local patron gets it.
Okay, and then what's the other one do again?
The other one, holds queue prioritize branch, is when the holds queue picks which copy to fill a hold with, its first choice before it gets to the transport cost matrix or any of the other holds queue logic, its first choice is either to get a book that is currently at the branch where the hold is to be picked up, which is what yours is set to right now, holding library, or to get a book whose home library matches the pickup branch, so that your hold transfer is sort of inherently pushing things back to their home library.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
essentially, go ahead.
I was going to say an example would probably be helpful. So if this is set to holds queue, if it's set to holding library, or if it's set to home library. So let's say I have a book at our Baser library that gets sent to Lansing. And when the holds, and that book gets checked in, and for whatever reason it's checked in and it's not in transit, and the book from Baser is at the Lansing library with a home library of Lansing or Baser and a current library of Lansing. If the holds, when the holds queue priority is built, when the holds queue is built, if that's set to home library, then the holds queue is going to assume that that Baser book is at the Baser library, and it's going to try and target that book to fill the first hold since it's available. But if the book is, if it's set to holding library, then the holds queue is going to assume that that book is at Lansing, where it actually is. And so if a Lansing hold needs to be filled, that book will be in the holds queue as fill this hold with this book at Lansing. Does that make sense?
So I think it complicated it for me. So I guess to it sounds like if I changed it to holding library because I figured that was going to lower the amount of transit of books in transit.
Yeah, it should.
Okay, then that's a good thing. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think setting it to holding library will minimize transfers, whereas setting it to home library will make
It's
those
gonna,
transfers. Yeah, it's going to get things home if getting things home
yeah.
is something that's important to you.
Okay,
If,
got
and
it.
if you have local hold priorities set to fill the requests at the home library of the item first, then it's going to be less of an issue because it's going to try and fill all of the Baser patrons will get the Baser books first before they get shipped anywhere else. So it's a good thing to run together, to have one of them set for, to have the local holds priority on, and then have the holding library be the pickup fill is going to create the least amount of transfers for you.
Okay, good. Thank you all.
I feel like the Koha community needs to fund someone to like just spend 40 hours a week sitting on top of a mountain knowing how holds work. Just to be like the holds guru. Because yeah, it's a lot.
I thought of another question.
Awesome.
How do we turn on the ability to assign phone notices? Like I've got email, I've got SMS, I've got paper. I'm just missing phone.
Yeah, there's a thing for that. Let me remember.
Yeah, you have to have the phone system integration turned on, which means you
Okay.
have to have the phone system set up.
Okay, so that's a Bywater thing to do.
Well, you are you using it now with your current system? Do you have a so I guess there's a system preference, phone notification.
Yeah.
And so you have to have that enabled. And if you have that enabled, it says that Talking Tech IT phone notification should be disabled. We've never had a system, so I don't know a lot about it, but you have to turn those on.
We
Yeah.
use message B, so we'll just be using the message B markup to send that data out to them.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I would ask Bywater about that one, because
okay.
I'm sure that they have other customers using message B. Maybe
Yeah,
even Dubuque, right?
I know I set up message B for somebody 2.5 years ago. I don't remember who. My memory is if you flip this switch to enable and then look at somebody. I think that's gonna show, yeah, that'll make the value
Okay.
show. There's nothing in place to send those, but it'll at least let you sort of have that checkbox and start checking it for people.
Right, but since we have the message B plugin installed, and I will have a field for the notices that I can put message B code into, presumably that will solve the problem itself.
Yeah. Yeah, some part of that won't really work yet, but it should at least get you underway
Yeah.
generating some
Yeah,
things.
mainly I need to be able to start setting things up.
Yeah, and that should work.
Great, thanks.
Is message B the one where you send message B just like a table of very minimal data and then they like build the whole notice on their end? That's a weird one. Just like weird for Koha because it moves a lot of the like notice scripting out of Koha.
I'm thankful that it does.
Well, yeah, it gives more flexibility, sure.
Well, it's just so much easier because trying to do a designed thing in that little text area just is painful.
Yeah, this is again me going back to web design school.
I use jQuery to make the text boxes. I don't like bigger.
Well, I mean, I can easily drag it and make it bigger, but there's, I'm used to working in Notepad++ where, and I can preview what I'm doing in a split second. And, so it's just very frustrating to step back a few decades.
Fair enough.
I do that, a lot of that too, where I put things in a text editor and make all the edits I want and then push them into Go.
Yeah. That's what I'm doing for the jQuery is I do it all in Notepad++ and then copy it over.
Mike in the chat linked to realtimehtml.com as a way to quickly and easily check your HTML, which is, I'm sure, a nice resource for HTML notices. Gotta love a good bare bones website. Does one thing well.
Yeah, I use a different one. I like this one a lot.
Who else has fun stuff going on in their Koha? Or unfun
I've got a
stuff?
question.
Yeah.
So I'm about to be filling out our item transportation cost matrix. So I've got 53 locations. So I've got a 53 by 53 grid. So my first impression is it's not a great idea to try to actually fill that out in Koha. It seems to me I should do that in Excel first, where I can freeze top panes or leftmost panes so I can see what I'm doing, and then put my screen side by side to fill the rest of that in.
That sounds like a good plan.
That's what I did. I filled this out when I was at the Latah County Library in Idaho for the Valnet Consortium. And another thing that's useful, there are a couple of pieces of jQuery I wrote for this, and I'm going to try and find them really quick. I'm sure that they're in the jQuery library.
Visual aid for those listening at home. This terrible thing.
Right. Mine's very big.
Yeah.
So I just put a link to one of the pieces of jQuery into the chat box. This is if you click on the row, it'll move it to the top of the matrix so that it's easier to follow with your eye. So there's some jQuery there that does that. And I think I have another one that will highlight a row. Maybe I didn't put that one in there, but I had some other jQuery that I wrote that if you hover over the to from column, it will highlight the whole row so that it's easier to follow it with your eye.
Okay.
And I'll try and find that and stick it on the wiki too. I haven't used that in a long time because we don't use the circulation transportation cost matrix at my current library, so I haven't used it for a long time. I would check that and make sure it works.
Yeah, it looks like it's not quite doing it, but
so it might need a little tweaking, but being able to move it to the top so that you don't have to try and figure out,
right, triangulate your position.
You have to triangulate those, 16 rows over and 32 rows down. it's a lot easier just to have it at the top of the page. So I'll look at that jQuery after this meeting's over and update it if it needs to be updated.
I appreciate that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The other question I had is I'm thinking the way to tackle it first is to just use mapping software and put in the actual miles of road between each library, and then manually adjust from there instead of trying to figure out how much it costs to move one book to another place. I don't know that. And I think it would take a long time to figure out what that cost actually is.
So the way that I managed it when I was at Latah County is I looked at not at the map so much, and I didn't really put in the mileage. What I did is I looked at the courier routes, because we had the central courier hub was in Lewiston, Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And then one courier route went north to Latah County Library. One went east out to the Prairie River Libraries on Highway 12. And one of them went, just stayed like in the city of Lewiston, because all of the school district libraries in Lewiston were part of that. And so kind of what I did is I said, and I wouldn't think of it as miles or cost so much as it's just a value. And
Right.
The higher the value, the less likely things are to transfer. Or the less likely things are to be targeted when it's building the holds queue report. And so what I did is I said, okay, if this is going to be in the same route, if it's going from one library on the same route to another library on the same route, I gave that like a 10.
Mm-hmm.
And if it had to change routes, then I added like 5 for each change in routes. And so it kind of took a bit of understanding what the courier system was, but that way I knew that the things at this one library would need to change courier routes twice, and I also calculated when things would have to spend a night at the courier hub, and figure out all those values together. And so it came up with a different value of each point for each library. And it took a while to build, but it worked out pretty well. And then I also one thing I didn't take into consideration was how many days a week the libraries were closed. I just kind of had to assume that the libraries were open and doing transfers every day.
Right. At a certain point, you have to stop introducing variables.
Yeah, and so
you'll never finish.
That's kind of how I worked it out. Is if it was the same route and it was going to be delivered the same day, that was one value, and then adding each time it jumped a route and each time it had to spend a night somewhere, there was I think I started with 15 was the base number, and jumping routes was 10, and spending the night somewhere was 5.
Okay.
And then I came up with a spreadsheet, and then I went through, and I think I wrote an auto hotkey script so I could have the Excel file open in this window and the matrix open in this window, and then it could just go back and forth, because it was the same thing. We had a 49 by 49 grid.
Yeah.
So it took a long time to figure it out.
All right. It seems like you're describing basically what I need.
Yeah.
That's great.
Is
my approach, including the auto hotkey script.
Is there anyone amongst us who has been not following this conversation of the transport cost matrix and wants to know what it's all about? Because it's kind of a hole that we could go down, but we don't need to.
Now, actually, let me ask Alexander one last thing. Are you a Bywater customer?
We are, yes.
What Bob in Colorado did is he just worked everything out in a spreadsheet, and then he emailed that to Bywater and said, can you plug this into the matrix?
Oh.
And they did it. And I think they did it pretty quick, because they had back-end access to all of that. And I think Bob's got even more libraries than both of us combined.
Yeah.
And he said it took him like a half a day. So,
well, that'd be preferable. I'll see if they can accommodate that.
Those are good questions to ask, because you never quite know. There are places in Koha where the data structure makes like updating things from the database harder than it should be. And then there are other places where it's really trivial. And I think this is one where like the data structure is nothing too bad. That's not an onerous update statement to run from the command line, but it's kind of a crapshoot.
Speaking of large spreadsheets, Bywater is working on making it so that, and this won't matter to most of you because you're already on Koha, but for those of us coming on, so that they can take a Excel spreadsheet of circ rules and automatically load that into the circ map, because we have over 500 rules and I was going to have to sit there for many hours entering those. So they decided to write something that would import them.
What kind of spreadsheet? Did they give you a spreadsheet or are you making this spreadsheet? Like I have so many questions.
So for my own sanity, what I did was I created an Excel spreadsheet to match what the column headings are in the circ map.
Sure.
And then I worked on transferring or translating what we have in Symphony to this new structure. And so I had created this spreadsheet that perfectly represented what we needed, but I had no way other than to manually enter all those values.
I was so excited to hear this at the meeting I had 2 weeks ago with Bywater. This was in the works because we have 1,300 lines on our circulation map.
Oh,
yikes.
A lot of those I'm finding as I go through it with a fine-tooth comb are redundant. So luckily we can scrap some of those, but it still would have been a ton of work. So
yeah,
exciting stuff.
A few years ago, there was a like trial balloon of a new interface for the circulation rules in Koha, and it didn't ever quite get anywhere. I think just because it was a lot. Like that's a big change. But one of the things that new interface did was automatically check your rules and delete anything that was redundant or like ineffective, which was really nice because it is so easy in the Koha interface to build up rules that don't do anything and to just make your rules hard to comprehend.
To make a long story short, that was a NEKLS sponsored development, but it was sponsored by my predecessor. And I've been here 8 years now. And it was one that essentially it was going to take the circulation rules and instead of making them a table this wide, it was going to make them a table this tall. And I was never really, it was a development that we paid half of and I never really cared about. And so I never pushed Bywater on it. And eventually they said, do we still even want to do this? And I said, I don't care. If they had already made a bunch of the changes that they had already made were covered by the part that we'd already paid. Because there was a lot of back end work that they did to get to the point where they could revamp the interface, but they never got to the point where they revamped the interface. And I said, if you just want to say we're good, I'm good. And that was kind of the end of it. That was really the one thing that would have been cool is the checking for redundancy. I don't think it actually eliminated a redundant rule, but it warned you that there was a redundant rule.
It was really promising when we like installed it on a system and set up like some basic rules and like, oh, that looks great. And then we applied it to an existing library system, maybe even NEKLS, to be like, okay, what does this look like with a robust rule set? And it was as unreadable as the current Koha interface, just in like a new and interesting way.
Yeah, that's the way I would describe it. It was, instead of being, I have 3 screens on my desk, and opening up the full circulation page, rules page, literally takes 2 and about 1/3 screens on my desk. And this just would have meant that I would have had to stack 2 of them on top of each other to get the whole thing. So it was an improvement it just would have meant scrolling a different direction.
So Juliet and Mike in the chat have voiced their deepest desires for circ rules. Juliet says they want logs when rules are changed. I feel like that is a bug, right? That's got to be a bug already. And Mike suggests he wants to be able to select multiple patron categories and multiple item types for the same circ rule line, which would be cool, like this is adults and kids. Yeah, that'd be good. I haven't seen that bug.
Symphony does that. It's awesome.
Koha introduced parent and child circ rules a couple versions ago, but they don't do as much as one might want them to do, and I don't even know that they do what they're supposed to do correctly. But full disclosure, that was like, I read the bug description and said, oh, I don't care about that, and didn't pay that much attention. So maybe they're amazing and they're just not for me.
I use those parent-child rules for our DVD collection, which has been broken down into DVDs and Blu-ray and DVD Blu-ray combo and the 3D Blu-ray. And of all of those, you can have 10. And so instead of having
Yeah.
10 Blu-ray and 10 DVD and 10 DVD combos, which was what we ended up having in Symphony, I could say, okay, no more than 10 of any of this kind. And that seems to work for us. So
That
that
makes
parent-child
sense.
rule works there.
And I think that so far, that's all it's been written to do, is to manage that kind of relationship. I did put a link in the chat to the bug that says circ rule changes should be logged. If anybody wants to go in and comment on it.
Oh, that's a very old bug.
Yeah, it's
Still
a
at
Bart.
status new.
Yeah, it's Barton's bug. So yeah, it's a long time ago.
Yeah. Did he start? I start scrolling through the bug. Like, I think Jessica also worked at Virginia Tech, who's not on Koha anymore. Oh, it's a little trip through memory lane. Okay.
Can we briefly go through the transportation cost matrix, Andrew, like you had mentioned?
Yeah. And like, what's its whole deal?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a tool for telling the holds queue how to prioritize which item to use to fill a hold. So like the holds queue runs and it looks at all the copies of the new James Patterson you own and decides which one's going to be the best for filling the first hold in line. This is the thing that lets you define your preferences there. So as it says costs, you're defining the cost to move a book from this branch to this branch. So if I've got a hold on that new James Patterson that I'm going to pick up in Centerville, I want to tell Koha which branch I most want to get a book from for that Centerville hold. By default, it's preferring Centerville. Use a book that's at the place where the hold is. But if perhaps Fairfield is like way on the other side of the state across 3 mountains and it's like you only get there by borough, you can say, okay, that has a cost of 99. We don't really like to do that. And then we can peg all these other branches sort of in between, weighting them relative to that score of 99. Maybe Fairview is really easy to get to. It's a very low score. And Franklin's somewhere in the middle. And for whatever reason, we just don't send anything from the Institut Protestant de Théologie. Oh, it's been too long since I took French. So we leave that one disabled. We just don't send items from here to here. Actually, we leave the rest of them disabled. Holds at Centerville will only be filled from these 4 branches, and it's going to take Centerville as its first choice. Fairview is slightly less preferable than Centerville, and it kind of scales from there. It's an arbitrary maximum value. That has tended to be a thing that hangs people up here. Make it whatever scale you want. Like I've got in this test data, what is that, 10 branches? So I guess like functionally, there's probably not a big reason to have a max number that's higher than 10. I don't know for certain how this logic all gets applied. I don't know how much difference it makes if they're all 1 through 10, except for one of the branches that's 100. George has probably played with this more than I have.
Yeah, when we used it at the in the Valnet consortium, the things that you have to remember about it is if there's only one copy, then the circulation transportation cost matrix is completely irrelevant, because if there's only one copy available to be added to the hold queue, then it's only important when there's a choice to make.
Sure.
If it's the brand new James Patterson and 100% of them are checked out, then it's also irrelevant, because it's only going to apply to building the holds queue, and the holds queue only builds off of available items. So if all of the copies are checked out, there's no choice to make. It's just gonna, the next time one gets checked in, that's the one that's gonna fill it. So those are the two, I think, most important things that get overlooked. It doesn't make it so that a book, the only way to make it so that a book will never fill it is to set it as disabled. But you know, if there's two copies and it's going to pick the one that has the lowest number is the one that's going to be on the holds queue for that library. The reason we don't use it is because it actually would put pressure. We have a courier system that has 3 main hubs in our area. This background is sometimes useful. So over here, you know, we have a hub that's up in this area, where these libraries are serviced by the Topeka Service Center. And then over in this area, most of the area is serviced by the Kansas City hub. And then we have some of these libraries down here that their hub is in Emporia. And so what happens is all of our biggest libraries are serviced by the Kansas City hub, and they're all really close together. There's Leavenworth, Lansing, Basser, and Bonner Springs are all about 10 miles apart on this strip of road. And without having it turned on, right now we've got it set to randomly build the holds queue. Every time that the holds queue is built, it's completely random. And we don't have the the continuously updated holds queue. We don't have the real-time holds queue. We don't have that turned on. It just rebuilds once an hour, 24 hours a day. And what happens is the libraries along here, from Leavenworth, Lansing, Basser, and Bonner Springs, and then over in Tonganoxie, if they're the busiest libraries, they're the biggest libraries, and they're all the closest, they're libraries that are closest together. So if we turn it on, it makes sense, since they're all on the same hub and they're all really close together. It's actually really easy for them to share things because they're so close together. They actually have the same courier, but if they don't get things from like up here in Seneca and Sabetha and these other places, they end up trading so much stuff with each other just in that group of 5 libraries that it overwhelms their courier, and their courier ends up with so much stuff on the vehicle that they start in Leavenworth, and by the time they get to Tonganoxie, they don't have any more room on the vehicle for books. And so we don't want it to be more efficient because it's already too efficient. And so we need some of those things to take extra time to get there. Otherwise, there would just be so much stuff being shared between those libraries that, you know, the other libraries would never get any stuff from any place other than, they would never get the stuff from those 4 libraries or 5 libraries, because they would all be jammed up in that courier bottleneck at those 5 libraries. So for us, it's a completely bad thing to turn it on here.
George, can I ask you a clarifying question?
Sure.
Share my screen again. So if I've got the transport cost matrix turned on and I have from Fairfield to Centerville disabled, does that tell Koha not to fill a hold with an item I check in at Fairfield, or does that only tell Koha not to target that item with the queue?
I think it just tells it not to build the holds queue off of that.
Okay, so that item will still fill the hold if it gets checked in. It's just not gonna. Okay.
Yeah, anything, and that's another thing with the transportation cost matrix is, yeah, if somebody checks in a book and it's not on the holds queue, it's just like any other, it's not on their holds queue report. It's just going to fill the hold anyway. It doesn't matter.
I
This
feel
is
like
just
Go
the
ahead.
transportation cost matrix only affects building the holds queue.
That
I
was
feel like-
something that we noticed problems with, is that because it checks system preferences first and then it checks the transport cost matrix. So we allow people to pick up items at other libraries, and we're starting our bookmobile, and we found that if a patron puts the bookmobile as their pickup location, but they still have downtown as their home library, it'll try to fill that hold with the downtown item rather than the bookmobile item, no matter what the
Interesting.
transport cost matrix has. And it's doing that with our Sturgis patrons too, but that was just a test. It's confusing, and I have a ticket that we went back and forth on Bywater and decided to keep our system settings how they are. But it has to do with the local holds priority. And then the holds queue prioritize branch rules. How you
Yeah.
set those can really affect which item gets picked.
Yeah. Just to wave at the system preferences that come into play here. Yeah, there's a, where did it go? Oh, this is the one that is about the transport cost matrix. Matrix. Ta-da. So if this is set to don't use, it doesn't matter what you set up on this page, it just doesn't come into effect at all. And then if the transport cost matrix isn't turned on, then your holds queue is probably just following this system preference, static holds queue weight, that lets you either like list a bunch of branches by branch code and say prioritize branches in this order, which seems really like hard-coded and weird. It's hard to imagine the library of any size that needs that. Or the way it was set with just a 0 in there, that's just straight random. Of all the libraries that own this book, pick one at random, and that's who we're going to fill the hold with.
Yes, we are set to random. What you can do is you can put all your library, we have all of our libraries in the static holds queue weight.
Sure.
All of them in there. And then like for the libraries that close for the summer, we take them out of there. And then that way nothing gets on their hold list when they're closed for the summer for our school libraries.
That makes sense.
But we do have the last one of these preferences, randomize hold queue weight, set to randomize. And so every hour, Koha just rolls the dice. And
I forgot you could make a list and then say random within that.
yeah.
List.
And that's why we have a list in there is it randomly picks from that list. But if you take a library out of that list because they're like closed for the summer or closed temporarily or whatever, then that will pull them out of there. Before I came to Kansas, NEKLS did for a time use the static holds queue weight. And what they would do is they would look to see who was sharing the most and who was sharing the least. And then they would rejigger that like every 2 months to make sure that the libraries that weren't sharing as much were pushed to the top of the list to get hit more by the
like a lot of work.
queue. Yeah, it was really awkward and it was untenable and people didn't like it and it didn't work well, so they stopped doing it. And somebody said one time, should we go back to that? And I said, I don't want to go back to that. I don't have time to be screwing around with that damn list every month. So we've never gone back.
It sounds great aside from the long list of problems. Christy, do you have other holds queue or transport cost matrix questions?
Not at this time. Thank you guys for explaining that.
Sure. Oh, I was going to wave at this thing too. While we're talking about holds and transfers and junk, there's this other thing that's kind of like the transport cost matrix, library transfer limits. This lets you outlaw the transfer of some items from a branch to a branch. Ugh. That was a terrible sentence and I'm sighing it. Like, it's just gross. Transfer limit. So this also has a system preference. Yes, that's fine. Do you want to use these transfer limits? And do you want to enforce them by collection code or item type? Which then says, so we've only got 3 collection codes in the default Koha data. So that's what these are right now. When set to collection code, it's saying fiction items. Do they go from Centerville to Fairfield? Yes or no? But then I just switched that system preference to item type. So now it is instead going to be by item type. Do they go from Centerville to this other branch? So if you just never ever send a book from Centerville to Fairfield, you can say, yeah, we don't do that. Don't allow that transfer. I believe that will block an item from filling a hold. But if anyone knows that for more certain, please jump in and correct me.
Yes, it will. And the person to really ask about that is Bob, because they use it heavily in Colorado because they have, a statewide consortium and it's a big state. And they have, people in the Northwest that don't share with libraries in the Northwest that don't share with libraries in the Southeast.
And if you
because it's such a monumental distance, and so they use that to kind of group their libraries together into groups that share and groups that don't share with other groups. So
yeah, and if you imagine this screen with more item types and more branches, it gets pretty unwieldy. This might be another fine opportunity to ask your support company if they have any way to make it easier to get that data in there. If you
well,
have
there is an advanced editor too, but I've never used it, so I'm not sure how it all works.
That's branch transfer limits type, Juliet. 128 item types and a gross of collection codes. No, sorry, 10 gross of collection codes. Right? A gross is a dozen dozens. This doesn't matter. Hello, I'm a librarian. Thanks, Mike. Yay, other people also know useless trivia. Welcome to Koha. Anyway, y'all, it's 11:04. We were supposed to talk until 11. Does anyone have any last minute emergencies? I want to put a bug in the chat. This is not the most important bug in the world, but it's one I wrote a patch for this morning. This is a really simple one. It puts the report ID number into the file name when you download a report. My boss asked me to do this because I name all my reports the same thing, and then we get confused. So anyway, if anyone has a minute and wants to sign off on a bug.
Do you name them all question mark, question mark, question mark? Because I when I got here, there were a few reports with that name.
Oh, I periodically go in and delete all the reports that have a single character name. Tends to be G or F. That's where my finger lands. And then a lot of boops and boo and boot. Yeah. We were just having a conversation today about how I need to learn to use report subgroups and start tagging things and marking them for what project they're for. Anyway, thank you all for your time. We'll see you again next month. Don't be a stranger. Happy Koha-ing.
Thank you all.
So long.